There has been an update on the Ben Askren situation, and that update is that his health insurance will not be covering his life saving lung transplant surgery. So now his family has gone to social media to ask for financial help. Now, this is surprising and unfortunate because you would think someone as successful as Ben Askren throughout his entire MMA career would have earned enough money to be able to afford to cover an expense like this. Being one of the most popular fighters in MMA outside of the UFC, and also even in the UFC once he transitioned over. But unfortunately, it seems like he doesn't. And not only that, he is not offered any sort of coverage health insurance wise through the UFC because we know the UFC does not offer that. Now, here, if you click on the donation link, this is where it sends you if you would like to go read about his situation and donate. But the bigger issue here is that insurance companies should be covering things like this. What is their excuse for not covering this sort of expense? What do they think gives them the right to hold power over people's lives like this? And other than that, when you dig even deeper, let's see. Lung transplant can cost anywhere from 50 or half a million to 1.3 million. That's a lot of money. And you can look deeper into the specific cause of his damage to his lungs, but I heard it's something to do with sepsis, but I could be wrong about that. And as far as other professional sports leagues, which is what the UFC is and considers itself as, other leagues offer health insurance. And they even offer it beyond their competition years. Such as the NBA, they offer health insurance for retired players. It says here players with 3 or more years of service are eligible for a plan. You can read the details here. The NFL provides health insurance for retired players for a limited time, typically 5 years after retirement. Even that is better than nothing, right? And on top of that, they offer health insurance while they're active. The MLB offers lifetime health benefits to people who accumulate at least 1 day of service time. Crazy. Other leagues, such as the NHL, have programs for retired players. Right, so the point is that the UFC offers nothing. And the reason they're able to offer nothing is because they consider their fighters as independent contractors, which allows them to avoid providing them benefits like health insurance. Wow. So they want to use the fact that they're independent contractors as a reason not to give them health insurance. Okay. You're independent. You got to provide it for yourself. Oh, but while you're under contract with the UFC as an independent contractor, you're not allowed to independently go outside of the UFC and fight under a different organization. So that logic doesn't make sense. It's pretty one-sided and benefits purely the UFC, or mostly the UFC. And if you're wondering, as I was, why such a popular fighter like Ben Askren is not able to afford this, part of the reason is because the UFC distributes approximately 16 to 20% of its revenue to its fighters, which is much less than other professional sports leagues, where they share the revenue around 50%. Okay. And just for example, just in the UFC alone, we know that Ben Askren was in 2 pay-per-view events and then 1 like fight night event. And in the Jones versus Smith event, they had about over 4 million in ticket revenue, and they had 520,000 through 650,000 pay-per-view buys. So when you multiply that, either of those numbers, even if you pick the lower one, 520,000, and multiply it by the price of a pay-per-view event, which at that time, I don't exactly recall, but let's say it's probably like $69. Let's call it $70, right? That comes out to about $36 million, plus the 4 million, 40 million. And then the pay is distributed. Well, here's another thing. You get paid off of what you bring to the table, right? The more popular you are, the more eyes you bring to the organization, you're supposed to get paid accordingly. And I believe, as far as a pay-per-view event like this, where it's estimated around $40 million that the fighters earn, that they don't split 16 to 20% of that money amongst the fighters on that card. I would doubt that is the case. So, what, they split that up amongst all the fighters on the UFC roster? It's used as a general fund to pay all 500, 600 fighters on the roster? That doesn't seem fair if it's supposed to be based off of individual independent contractors who are paid based off of the eyes they bring to the table. So Ben should have earned much more money than he did in the UFC off that pay-per-view and the next pay-per-view, because I would argue that he was probably the most popular fighter on those cards, on every card that he was on, because many people loved him and a lot of people just wanted to see him lose. I'll admit, including me, but I was watching to watch him, as I'm sure many of you were. So, and I looked somewhere else. I believe it said it's estimated here at around 800,000 during the time in his UFC career. Oh, here it was. Roughly 830,000 during his 3 fights in the UFC. Yeah, shame. We can break down this monetary compensation more, but it's probably better for a different video. But just the general point is he should have earned way more money in the UFC than he was actually given. And he wasn't offered insurance at any point. Dana, obviously he earned the money he has. It's definitely well deserved. But I don't know, you can't help but to kind of look at him with a little side eye when you see all the money he has, and he still gets paid per year, around 20 million per year, it says. So is Dana White gonna offer to pay for his surgery? At this point, I would be surprised if he doesn't, because he's worth so much. There's so many eyes on this situation. People know he has the money. I would expect him to, at least it'll be publicly known at some point, that he either pays for the whole thing or a large portion of it. But to leave it up to chance and that it's going to be covered by the donations of just strangers, I don't think it should be left on the in the hands of the general public, people who struggle for money or have much less than Dana. Yeah, and I mean, what about Dana? What about Hunter Campbell? What about them other dudes at the top in the UFC? I'm sure they're worth millions upon millions of dollars. What about just the organization itself? Worth how many billions? Like 12 billion? Why aren't they just offering to pay for this? If they allow, well, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Yeah, and this is just here because this is what everybody's thinking when they heard the news that the insurance is not covering. Anyway, that's the news. If you'd like to donate, go ahead and donate. But hopefully one of the rich people will come forward and do it themselves. Come on, Dana. Consider this a gift. Pay for his surgery. And think of it as it's money that should have been owed to him regardless.